Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome back. So, in our last lecture, we have discussed how we can quantify or we can measure the absolute value of elasticity of demand along various points on a given demand curve. We have considered both linear and nonlinear demand curves. In other words, usual demand curve we have considered downward sloping, but those demand curves can be a straight line, can be a general hyperbolic kind of thing, not straight line like that, and we have discussed how to find out elasticity of demand, or more specifically on price elasticity of demand on different points along that demand curve. So, today we will play with that concepts or around that concepts using different alternative types of demand curves and what are the elasticity of demand value across different points on each of those demand curves, right. So, let us talk. Of course, I think all of we or all of you already got an impression that if demand curve is relatively flatter, on price elasticity of demand will be relatively more vis-a-vis a demand curve relatively steeper. Okay. So, when we are telling that own price elasticity of demand is greater than or own price elasticity of demand is more in one sort of demand curve vis-a-vis the another sort of demand curve, as we clarified in our last class, we are always talking about the absolute value of the elasticity of demand, because as you know that since elasticity of demand and the demand curve is downward sloping, this elasticity value is always negative, right. So, in usual case of course, okay. So, it is negative. So, that is why when we are telling demand is elasticity of demand is more, it is in always in absolute sense, right. So, let us discuss why let us show how say one relatively flatter demand curve elasticity of demand is more vis-a-vis on the same point on a relatively steeper demand curve. So, let us see. So, say suppose we are taking this as usual, we are measuring quantity demanded in the horizontal axis, price in the vertical axis, and suppose we have two demand curves, say one is A B, another is A B prime or A prime B prime, right. And when we are telling that relatively steeper demand curve, relatively flatter demand curve and elasticity of demand on a point on one curve is larger than on the other curve. So, it will be easy for if we take the common point on both the demand curves, say suppose this point say E, right. So, as you know that E point lies on both the demand curves, two alternative demand curves we have considered here, one is A B, another is say A prime B prime, and E point lies on both the demand curves. Now, the question is elasticity of demand or own price elasticity of demand and its absolute value, okay. At point E, if we consider E point to be on the A B demand curve, what is that value? Vis-a-vis on the A prime B prime demand curve, what is that value, right. It is very easy to understand. So, when E point on A B demand curve, so elasticity value is elasticity value is basically E B by E A, okay. Absolute value of the own price elasticity is basically E B by E A, because we have shown in the last lecture that it will be the lower segment of the demand curve by the upper segment of the demand curve. So, A B is the demand curve, E is a point on that. So, lower segment of the demand curve is basically this, upper segment of that demand curve is basically that, right. Vis-a-vis that E point, when E point lies on A prime B prime demand curve, its absolute value of the own price elasticity definitely E B prime by E A prime, okay. So, as you can easily see that E B is less than E B prime and E A is greater than E A prime, right. So, definitely this is lower than this, because numerator is larger and denominator is smaller, okay. So, when we are talking about so we are getting an impression that if we have two demand curves, one is relatively flatter, another is relatively steeper, along the relatively flatter demand curve, relative elasticity of demand is elasticity on price elasticity of demand is relatively larger than the vis-a-vis the relatively steeper demand curves. Okay. So, using that diagram, this diagram, it is clear. Now, we can play around this various this type of, say, suppose if alternatively, alternatively suppose say we have, if we have parallel demand curves, as usual we are measuring quantity here, price here, and suppose we have one demand curve this, say this is AB, okay, and suppose this is A prime B prime, where AB and A prime B prime are parallel to each other. Okay. Now, you know that if we move along the horizontal axis or along this kind of horizontal line, okay, as we are moving. So, this point and this point, suppose this point is E, this point is E prime. So, if we compare the elasticity or same on price elasticity of demand, its absolute value at E point and E prime point. So, when we are talking about at E point on the AB demand curve and E prime point on the A prime B prime demand curve. So, clearly elasticity of demand is at E point is larger. Why? Because look at here, at E point elasticity of demand is EB by EA, and E prime point it will be E prime B prime by E prime A prime. So, in both the cases, look at here, the numerator EB and E prime B prime, these are same, because why? Because since this red color horizontal line is parallel to the horizontal axis and the two demand curve AB and A prime B prime are parallel to each other. So, by virtue of that, this is a parallelogram, basically E prime B prime B, this is a parallelogram. Okay. If that is the case, EB equals to E prime B prime. So, these two elasticity, the elasticity at E point on AB demand curve and elasticity at E prime point on A prime B prime demand curve, if we consider. So, both the elasticity values, numerator value is same, but denominator is more in the case of A prime B prime demand curve. So, definitely elasticity is less as E prime point. Okay. So, in that way, so similarly if we take another the same kind of thing, parallel demand curve, but if we go vertically, say suppose say as usual quantity here, price here, one demand curve is this, another demand curve is this, A B and A B prime, suppose A B or A prime B prime, okay, they are parallel and we are moving this kind of vertical line. Okay. So, suppose this is E, this is E prime. Okay. And we can easily show that elasticity at E prime point is more than elasticity at E point. Elasticity when we are talking about, let me clarify again, elasticity at E prime point, when we are telling elasticity of demand at E prime point, considering E prime point on the demand curve A prime B prime. Exactly the same way, elasticity of demand at E point, considering the E point on the demand curve A B point. So, in that way, if we compare, definitely elasticity at E prime point is more than elasticity at E point, because here this is the numerator and this is the another numerator. So, here numerator for this elasticity value or elasticity at this point, numerator is more than the numerator for the elasticity of at E point, but both the denominator is same, because here A prime, E prime, E, this is a parallelogram. So, A E and A prime, E prime, they are same. Okay. So, in that way, if we go say along a horizontal line, what will be the elasticity on the two points on the two parallel demand curves? If we go along a vertical line, what will be the two? So, in that way, alternatively we can compare or we can play around different demand curves or taking different alternative different type of demand curves and what will be the elasticity of demand value on those. Can we have any idea? Suppose we have this kind of similarly two parallel demand curves, this is A B, this is A prime B prime. Okay. Of course, we are measuring quantity here, price quantity in the horizontal axis, price in the vertical axis, and suppose we are along a ray through the origin. Okay. So, suppose this is E point and this is E prime point, right. So, what will be the elasticity of demand at E point when it is on the AB demand curve, and at the E prime point when it is on the A prime B prime demand curve? If you compare, you can show that these 2 points elasticity of demand is same. Okay. It is very easy to prove. Suppose, let us prove that. Suppose O is our origin. So, you can understand that from the you can easily understand that two triangle OEB and triangle OE prime B, this is B prime, right, B prime. These two triangles are similar because one triangle is this, another triangle is this, and since EB and E prime B prime are parallel to each other. So, these two triangles are similar. So, if that is the case, we can write that by similarity of these two triangles, we can write that OE by EB is exactly equals to OE prime by E prime B prime, right. So, that is suppose our equation number 1. Exactly same way the triangle say OEA and triangle say OE prime A prime, they are also similar, right. OEA and OE prime A prime, OEA and OE prime prime. So, they are similar. So, since they are similar, we can write OE by EA will be exactly equals to OE prime by E prime A prime. So, if we take its reciprocal, so this is basically A by OE will be exactly equals to E prime A prime by OE prime, that is suppose our equation 2. Now, if you do that equation 1 into equation 2, what you will get? Mind that both side of equation 1 and 2, whatever the 4 fractions are there, none of them are 0. So, we can easily do this kind of thing. So, 1 and 2, if left hand side if you multiply, so this will be OE by EB into EA by OE, that must be equals to OE prime by E prime B prime into E prime A prime by OE prime. So, this OE OE prime will cancel out. So, you will learn that EA by EB. Okay. So, let us so we can write, so EA by EB, that must be equals to E prime A prime by E prime B prime. Okay. So, EA by EB exactly equals to E prime A prime by E prime B prime. So, if we take the reciprocal, simply EB by EA. So, this thing, the last part is basically same as EB by EA is exactly equals to E prime B prime by E prime A prime. So, EB by EA is basically elasticity of demand at E point on the demand curve AB, and E prime B prime by E prime A prime is basically elasticity of demand at E prime point on the demand curve A prime B prime. So, definitely the elasticity of demand at this point and elasticity of demand at this point are same, and exactly the same way we can show this point and this point elasticity of demand are same, this point and this point elasticity of demand are same. The same on those points on the corresponding demand curve, not the same demand curve, right. Those 2 points are not on the same demand curve, right. So, in that way we can take various points, various alternative demand curves and various related points and compare what are the elasticity of demand on those points, right. It will be helpful as we move around or play around these kinds of alternative possibilities, our understanding of elasticity of demand will be much and much fine tuned. Okay. So, this is all about how we can basic understanding or basic idea to discuss all these things are that we have started with, as you can remember, we have started with today that how we can show that elasticity of or own price elasticity of demand's absolute value is be relatively larger in a flatter demand curve, and all these things playing around we have discussed in that context, right. Now, let us discuss that, say, taking say alternative different types of demand curves and their elasticity of demand values and all. Depending on the elasticity of demand value, okay. So, let us draw the 5 alternative diagrams. Or say suppose all these diagrams, horizontal axis we are measuring quantity and vertical axis we are measuring price, all the diagram we are measuring the same thing, okay. Or few alternative diagrams let us discuss, okay. Suppose on extreme case, suppose this is the demand curve is vertical line, okay. So, at this point, at this point, at this point, various points, what is the elasticity of demand you can easily calculate, okay. Since quantity we are measuring in the horizontal axis, so from say suppose this is A point and this is B point. So, A point and B point its price is changing, right, but quantity remains the same. So, del q amount is 0, right. So, elasticity is definition del q by del p into p by q, that if you plot there you will see that across different points, right, say suppose B point and C point, right. So, B point and C point both elasticity is 0, elasticity value is 0. Not only that, along that vertical line every point the elasticity own price elasticity value is 0, okay. One departure, now we can get one essential message that we have shown that if your demand curve is straight line, okay, then along that demand curve various points elasticity of demand value changes, but what we have proved, that we have proved in the last class. So, that changing actually in that case demand curve is usual downward sloping, not this kind of vertical or horizontal kind of extreme demand curves, right. So, exactly the same way if we have this kind of horizontal demand curve, we can show that all these points elasticity of demand value is undefined or sometimes that is called infinitely large, okay. Another caveat, since if we have a demand curve, unusual demand curve or extreme demand curve which is vertical, okay, we can show and we are showing here that along the different points on that demand curve elasticity demand value is 0. So, we can tell that along a vertical demand curve elasticity of demand value is same and that same value is 0 at different points value elasticity value is same on that demand curve, right, and that same value is 0. Here although this point is infinitely large, this point also infinitely large, since infinity does not have any definition or any boundary, right, this mass say 35,000 kilometer is infinity like that. So, there is no such definition for infinity, although at different values it is infinitely large we can write, but it is always better we should not claim that these are same at this point and this point, because here infinitely large, here also infinitely large, but we should not tell that they are same, okay. Anyway, but we can understand the basic message if we have a demand curve as a vertical, if we have demand curve horizontal, this kinds of extreme kind of demand curve, right. So, what will be the elasticity of demand value on alternative points on that demand curve, right, okay. So, this is the thing. So, now say suppose we have a downward sloping demand curve, okay, can we get, so if demand curve is downward sloping or usual demand curve, okay, and if it is linear we know that along that various points on the demand curve elasticity of demand value changes from one point to another. So, if we at all search for a demand curve along different points on that elasticity value remains fixed, that should not be a straight line for sure, at least that message we are getting. So, after few minutes we will discuss that what that kind of demand curves look like. Okay. So, two different terminologies you will get. So, here elasticity of demand value is 0, here infinitely large. If we can have say this kind of straight line demand curve and its midpoint, suppose midpoint means this distance and that distance, elasticity value definitely at this point is 1. Okay. This segment elasticity value is greater than 1, this segment elasticity value is less than 1, right. So, everywhere absolute value of elasticity, absolute value equals to absolute value of elasticity is less than 1, absolute value is elasticity is 0, and that absolute value of elasticity is say infinitely large, right. So, in this, so we can take, so absolute value everywhere, look at here we are discussing about absolute value, right. So, that means when we are telling absolute value is less than 1, like this kind of case, it must be a fraction, right. When we are talking of fraction means it is in between 0 and 1, in that sense positive fraction, right. It is also in this case also it is a positive fraction, but fraction is greater than 1 in that way, right. So, let us bring certain terminologies, say when absolute elasticity value is say less than 1, we will call, say for the demand curve or for the commodity or for the demand curve where elasticity value is this kind of thing, we will tell that that demand is inelastic demand curve, okay, or that demand is inelastic demand, and for the commodity for which this is the value, we will tell that demand for that commodity is inelastic in that way. Okay. So, exactly the same way when this is 1, also this is inelastic, this will be called unit elastic. Okay. And when this E value is greater than 1, it will be called, you can easily understand then, elastic. If a commodity for which my elasticity of demand, own price elasticity of demand is more than 1, we will call that my demand for that commodity is elastic, okay, is elastic, okay, in that way. And definitely two extreme case when this is equals to 0, one extreme case, and another extreme case this is infinitely large. Okay. So, this case it will be called perfectly inelastic, and this case it will be called perfectly elastic. So, demand is perfectly elastic in this case and demand is perfectly inelastic in this case. I am hopeful, I am quite sure that all of you can understand in which sense this is perfectly inelastic and this is perfectly elastic, because when it is greater than 1 it is elastic, and its extreme value when the limiting case when we can reach the infinitely large. So, that is the perfectly elastic. Exactly the same way when it is less than 1 it is inelastic, and which is the minimum value or limiting case where we can attain, that is the 0 value when we attain perfectly inelastic in that sense, right. Now, let us discuss, and when it is 1, that time it is called unit elastic. Okay. So, this alternative terminology is also nothing to memorize and nothing try to memorize. So, if you logically try to understand, you can understand easily that what are the, how the terminology, alternative terminologies are coming into the picture. Okay. All we are discussing about elasticity of demand, right. What are the factors that determine this elasticity of demand, right. So, 3-4 factors are there. So, first factor of course, so we are discussing now determinants of elasticity of demand, right. So, first factor of course, availability of substitute, availability of closed substitute. So, you can easily understand that if there is a commodity we are consuming who has another close substitute available in the market. So, definitely my demand for that commodity will be much more responsive or much more price sensitive. Okay. So, if close substitute are available in the market, definitely it will be more elastic demand, right. Or let us take an example, say simple example, bath soap. Bath soap bar, what we use in our daily life during bathing, right. You know that lot of alternative varieties are available in the market, mostly alternative brand, okay, Vivel, Pierce, Dove, like so many other varieties, right. So, you can understand under the ceteris paribus condition, say under the ceteris paribus condition means we are suppose considering a particular brand, say Vivel, okay. Under the ceteris paribus condition means when all other whatever the available bath soaps are there in the market, their price is not changing. If Vivel price is little bit changed, right, what customers will react? Perhaps customer will quickly switch from Vivel product to the another brand, right. So, customer will be more price sensitive, okay, because close substitutes are available in the market. And if there is no close substitute or not much close substitutes are available in the market, customers can't be that much price sensitive, right. So, elasticity will be less, okay. So, of course, so availability of close substitute determine the elasticity of demand value. Second, nature of the commodity what we are consuming, nature of the commodity itself, commodity or good whatever or service, commodity itself. How the nature, say suppose one commodity is necessary commodity to me. So, definitely that I can't be or I can't behave much price sensitive way for that commodity, because it is necessary to me, right. Say food items, right, rice, wheat or bread or whatever food items, right, those are necessary to us, right. So, even if their price increases huge, right, we can't cut down our consumption to that much extent, right, because we have to consume, those are necessary to us. Vis-a-vis when, and similarly the alternatively if their price falls very much, so should we consume huge amount, since those are necessary we are almost consuming whatever we required, okay, unless we have some starvation kind of situation or we do not have enough money to purchase the enough amount of food for our consumption. Even if price falls very much, right, we can't increase that much of the consumption of that commodity, because since it is necessary we have to consume the required amount of quantity or some little bit adjustment of that, not very away from that required quantity, right. So, that is the when the commodity is necessary to us, our elasticity of demand will be more inelastic, vis-a-vis when the commodity is a luxury commodity, right, we can luxury, since the commodity is luxury for our consumption or for our daily life, right. So, without that commodity we can sustain, right. So, that is why if we will be much more price sensitive to that commodity, if price increases we will perhaps stop purchasing that commodity, right, in that way, okay. Similarly, say how we are defining the commodity itself or definition of the market. By this what we are referring, say suppose if we are say broader versus narrower, broader versus narrower definition, broad versus narrow definition, right. Say suppose when we are talking about a commodity is food, definitely its elasticity of demand will be less, because food is a necessary commodity to us, okay. So, its elasticity of demand will be inelastic, our demand will be inelastic for that commodity. But if we consider a specific type of food, ice cream also a food, right, but ice cream when we are telling that it is a narrow definition of food, okay, a specific type of food, right. So, definitely our elasticity of demand will be much more price sensitive to that. Why? Because maybe when ice cream demand is our price increases very high, perhaps we will quickly switch to the another substitute food item, right, say cold drink kind of thing, right. Ice cream is a dessert, if it is a dessert we perhaps we will quickly switch to another sweet kind of thing or some payasam kind of thing, right. Or if it is a cold, due to cold we are or hot weather we are taking ice cream, we are consuming ice cream, perhaps we will switch to the cold drinks, right. So, in that way when we are defining that commodity itself in a relatively broader definition kind of thing like food, then elasticity of demand will be relatively inelastic, and when it is a narrower it will be much more elastic. Similarly, time horizon, say 4, time horizon, that also determine that elasticity of demand. To be specific, when it is a relatively smaller time, a shorter time span, elasticity will be more, or our demand will be more inelastic vis-a-vis longer time or larger time span, or relatively longer time span, elasticity will be much more, or demand will be much more elastic. Why? Let us give an example. Say suppose I live in a city, okay, and certain distance, my residence in the city and my workplace, and there is a distance, right. So, I am habituated to commute between my home to my office by my personal 4-wheeler car, right. So, since I have a car, so petroleum products is an essential commodity to me because it is fuel for my car, right. Now, if petrol price suddenly increases very high, perhaps within the shorter time span, maybe say within next 1 week or so, I can't adjust my behavior, right. But perhaps petrol price if increases in that way and for the over the long period, say maybe next 1 year, next 2 years, like that, perhaps in the longer time span I will try to adjust my behavior. Perhaps I will not use my car to commute daily and quickly switch to the alternative means of transport, maybe bus or maybe metros, whatever public transport available in that city, right. So, this time horizon means relatively longer period, it is easy for adjust our behavior. So, as a result our demand for this essential commodity, say fuel here, my demand for that fuel will be much more inelastic when it is a relatively smaller period of time, within next 1 week or so. I can't immediately switch my behavior, right. But if given a sufficiently longer time, I can adjust my behavior to switch, say from my own car little bit comfortable journey to perhaps I will compromise little bit to avail to public transport system to cut down my transportation cost, right. So, these are the factors which determine elasticity of demand, okay. Okay.